Hey there, viewers. It's Joel from the Mentionables, and
Today I have something pretty special for you.
we're going to be looking at this video.
Today I have 7 signs you'll be an atheist
We're
one
looking
day.
today at number 5.
But first, roll that intro.
Okay, we are live.
We are. Without further ado, let's get started. 7 signs you'll be an atheist one day. Number 5. You want to prove religion true and use science to do it.
You're on a journey to prove your religious belief true with empirical evidence. Like Luke in the cave on Dagobah, such a path has only what you take with you. Bring any presuppositions, nostalgia, traditions, or a desired outcome, and you bypass intellectual honesty for a home in self-delusion. Remember, on this journey, your holy book is not your guide, not your map. You're trying to recreate the puzzle that is your faith without using the picture on the box. Start with corner pieces. Who wrote your holy book? And when? What does it really say? Can you arrive at these conclusions using only evidence, not faith? Next, fit in the pieces of science, history, philosophy, ethics. Wherever the journey of evidence takes you, that's where your home is, even if your faith couldn't come along.
Okay, so the claim here is that using science in order to prove religion will set you on the path to atheism. I've done extensive interviews with scientists who were Christians, and I'm studying Christians who've become atheists, and I can't say that the claim holds up. Now, I'll grant him that there seem to be 2 kinds of scientists who are Christians. The first kind are people who do science and also go to church. The second kind are people who are actively engaged in trying to back their particular religious claims with science. Now, in this instance, I'll agree with them that you kind of get what you're looking for unless you're objective in your science. In the scientists that I've interviewed, none of whom were working for religious organizations, they don't go into the lab with religious assumptions, whatever that means. They're just interested in finding out how things work. But what you find is that they're very comfortable with their religious beliefs exactly because they can find out how things work. The universe seems orderly and intelligible, and quite frankly, amazing to them. And its very order and intelligibility is what fits quite comfortably with their belief in an orderly intelligence that lies behind the universe. So then Apologia, I see what you did there. After saying that whatever presuppositions you bring with you are going to corrupt your findings, gives his viewers advice on how to do science objectively. A couple of things. Firstly, if you're going to suggest that if you don't do science right, you'll just affirm your views, then I don't think you can go on to say that using science to prove religion is going to turn you into an atheist. Again, I'm agreeing with him that you'll tend to find what you're looking for when you bring presuppositions into science. But that more or less makes his argument self-refuting. Secondly, I'm a little confused as to who he thinks he's talking to. I mean, presumably he's talking to a person that has their microscope and telescope and oscilloscope all packed up and ready to go out and prove God. And so he's giving them advice on how to proceed, I guess. I don't think he's really thought this one through. Apologia then goes on to tell whoever he thinks he's talking to that they need to abandon their holy book, which is very inclusive of him, and use science, and also history and scholarship and philosophy, to form a worldview. I think he's trying to say that if their worldview is correct, then they should be able to arrive at it by science and scholarship and philosophy without reference to their holy book, with sort of a wink and a nod that they're just going to end up disproving their worldview instead. Again, this sort of argues against his idea that using science to prove religion is going to make you an atheist. What he's really saying is that if you use the method he's outlining, then you'll become an atheist. So this serves as more of a recruitment video than it does an objective observation. So his steps. Who wrote your holy book? And when? And what does it really say? This isn't exactly science. It's more like scholarship. And you have to reference the holy book in order to figure out all of what he's asking. Why? Because the only way to find out who wrote it and when and what it really says is to read it. Now you'll hear this argument that you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible. This sort of operates off this idea that the Bible is a single monolithic book with one author and you're just fact-checking from the outside. The point of fact is it's more like a library of books, and you need to cross-reference them in order to find out who wrote them and when and what they really say. Ultimately, this is an argument that isn't going to get you very far. There are Christians who have become atheists after studying the Bible. He's correct. Bart Ehrman comes to mind. There's also atheists who become Christians after studying the Bible. Lee Strobel and J. Warner Wallace come to mind. So if setting out to prove the Bible objectively can lead you to atheism, apparently sitting down to disprove the Bible objectively can lead you to Christianity. So if I may be permitted the same leeway Pelagia has taken, here's what I'll say. Don't bring your atheistic, naturalistic assumptions in when you're reading the Bible. Try to read it objectively without just assuming it's all mythology. Look at the context in which it's written. Check the archaeological finds and other texts contemporary to Christian. These are 66 books written over hundreds of years of history. So if their narrative is internally consistent over all of that time and across all of those books, ultimately, focus on the Gospels and on Jesus of Nazareth. Because however many talking snakes and man-eating fish you toss out, if the bit about Jesus is true, so is Christianity.
So number 5, this idea that if you're trying to use science to prove your religion, well, you're on your way to atheism. Because science, you can't bring all of that religious baggage with you. You have to come to science empty-headed and thoughtless. Wait, no, that's not really what he said. Without your presuppositions, without your biases. Well, here, newsflash. We all have presuppositions. We all have biases. There is no such thing as this romanticized idea of the truth seeker free of bias, pursuing it wherever it leads. Everyone has biases. Everyone brings to the scientific endeavor their own baggage of worldview and beliefs. The only people apparently who are free of this are atheists? No, you bring your atheistic, naturalistic, only material things can exist worldview to the project. But here's the thing. Reality is the questions that we are looking to answer here aren't even scientific questions. Science does not have the tool set to adequately address issues that religion is focused on. Does God exist? Science can't even enter the arena. Are miracles possible? Science cannot even enter the arena. Okay, we're talking about things that are outside of the scope of science. Now here's the thing. Science in these situations act kind of like forensics. Right? In a courtroom, right? Science may be able to show that the defendant's fingerprints are on the gun. Does that mean he's the one that pulled the trigger? No. No, it doesn't. Maybe it's his gun and he's fired it before. So of course his fingerprints are on it. But he wasn't holding it at that point, was he? I don't know. Science can't actually tell you that. You need something else in the mix. Likewise, there are plenty of things about life, about the world, about God, that science can kind of give you a data point, right, that kind of explains it, fits in, it's consistent with a particular claim. Just like the fingerprints on the gun is consistent with the guilt of the defendant, but not necessarily. There are scientific points that are consistent with the existence of God. And so they're actually part of the argument, but science alone. And so again, what we have here is this idea that if you're doing this wrong, it leads you to be an atheist. Do you see that? Right? If you're approaching the thing saying science alone determines the outcome, and if you're trying to use science, you must go to atheism. No. If you're coming to science and you're saying, okay, I'm going to use these scientific data points to then look to see what they are consistent with and what they explain largely about life, by also bringing into the mix history and philosophy and metaphysics into it. Because that's what we all do, right? It's like a recipe. And I don't care if you're atheist or agnostic or Christian or Buddhist or New Age spiritist, right? Whatever you do, when you come to these questions, it's a recipe of different things, from philosophy, from metaphysics, from science. So if you're just saying, hey, you know what? Science in the mix kind of shows that this is true. Well, that's not going to lead you to atheism, not if you're thinking correctly about it. So again, it seems to me we have a situation where it's thinking incorrectly about something is what's going to get you down the road to atheism.
Number 5, this fifth objection, that you want to prove your religion true and that you want to use science, it's kind of like the last one, but also, okay, so what? I don't see how this would be a sign that someone's going to be an atheist. Part of this may come from my views of just how much science should be expected to be found in the Bible and the limits of science to begin with, where I just don't think science is really the tool to use to understand religious truth and belief. Here, my biggest issue is that he seems to use science in a non-technical and equivocal use, where any interaction with evidence just is science. This is a sloppy use of the term. There are numerous ways that history, philosophy, textual criticism, etc., all interact with evidence, but are not science, properly speaking. In fact, here we could look at differences between historical and experimental science even. In fact, he even makes the false statement that we cannot use our holy books as evidence, which is just wildly simplistic and false. If he means that we cannot say that the Bible claims to be the Word of God, therefore it's the Word of God, and setting aside the role this kind of argument plays in some versions of presuppositional apologetics, I agree. We cannot use it in that way. But scholars and historians and archaeologists and so many others use religious texts, including the Bible, as evidence all the time. It's about as wrong to say that we can't use the Bible as evidence of truth, full stop, as it is to say that we can't believe it is the Word of God because it claims to be the Word of God. So I think the scientism of pop atheism here is really the only thing that this sign highlights.
Okay, so I actually largely agree with Apologia here, except I don't think the process he describes actually leads to atheism, although in some cases it has potential to, especially when presuppositions come along for the ride. For example, if you presuppose that only natural causes or explanations exist when you're ruling out possibilities, then you're taking those possibilities out of play before you even begin. I like that he points out the importance of leaving presuppositions behind, though. However, I feel that the intent isn't really that we leave all prepositions behind, only the ones related to the potential existence of God. He goes on to say we have to recreate the puzzle without the picture on the box. I think this is fair. However, often the box top, or what we would consider the core ideas and structure of a religion, can leave significant clues that either exclude it entirely from being considered as a valid worldview, or explain enough of reality that it would clue us into the fact that maybe it's worth checking out the rest of the puzzle. So, I think the most honest approach that I can personally think of involves putting the pieces of the puzzle together while looking at various box tops and considering if they help explain why the pieces are coming together the way they are. At least here, Apologia is willing to include a variety of topics worth covering: history, literary criticism, philosophy, ethics, and so on. Again, I have very little to disagree with here, aside from the potential for flawed methodology, i.e., ruling out any possibility of supernatural or miraculous events before you even begin. But I do disagree that an honest approach to the evidence is always going to lead to atheism. I think many Christians, including myself, can firmly say that it's the piecing together of the evidence as unobjectively as objectively as possible and as free of bias as possible that actually brought them to Christianity in the first place, and or brought their faith back from the brink of turning to atheism.